What's going on, guys? Your friendly neighborhood travel photographer here, Brendan Vanson, and I've got a podcast today. I have been saying for so long that I want to get back to the podcast, and I just haven't done it for many reasons. I want to make excuses about not having the time or something like that, but I think anything I will tell you is actually just an excuse. I've had the time. I think that the real thing that's been stopping me from doing a podcast is that I've wanted to do them in chronological order, kind of like a backstory to my life in a weird way. And there's a block in my life story, and a story that I haven't wanted to tell for a number of reasons. And the truth is that story is the reason that I stopped podcasting, because for my story to flow, I have to tell this story and I have to go through this story. And like I said, I don't want to tell this story. This is going to be the podcast of the story of the time I got kidnapped in Colombia. And there are so many reasons I don't want to tell this story. But the two biggest reasons I don't want to tell this story, one, it's a story and probably the only story that I haven't told my family about. My family, if you're watching this, I'm sorry I never told you about this. I didn't want them to worry when I was traveling, because I was going through some crazy things and I was doing crazy things. I was, as you guys know, sleeping on the beach at times in Brazil because I couldn't afford hotel rooms. I was roughing it out in the world, trying to make it as a travel photographer in my first couple years. And when you're roughing it in the world, sometimes rough things happen to you, especially when you're not very smart. And I wasn't very smart. I'm a Canadian kid from a small town, and I just didn't have a whole lot of experience with dangerous things or dangerous people or dangerous situations. And as a result, it was kind of easy for me to accidentally fall into dangerous situations because I wasn't super aware. And I think that's changed. I think now, here in the future, 2024, it's now 15 years or so after this story happened to me. I'm smarter now. I'm no longer as silly as I once was. Yeah, I think I can safely tell this story with my family knowing that I'm smarter now. So to my family, I'm sorry I never told this story. It was for your own protection. And the second reason I never told this story is for a love of Colombia. Colombia, when I traveled, was the first place on the planet that ever felt like home to me. It was the first place, including Canada, that I ever felt like this is somewhere I belong. This is somewhere I feel happy and I feel content. I feel joy. I feel like I belong. It was a really interesting feeling. It's something I never felt. I grew up in small town Canada, as you guys know, and there I definitely didn't feel like I belonged. I felt like I was, too much of a city boy being from the town for my friends that lived in the countryside. And I felt like I was too much of a country boy for my friends that lived or wanted to move to the city. I just felt like I didn't belong there amongst, people that had a more narrow worldview than I had, among people that wanted a simpler life, no disrespect, than I wanted, that just wanted an easier life than I wanted. I wanted kind of a hard life. I wanted a crazy life. I wanted to be chased by pirates, and I wanted to get stuck in quicksand, and I wanted all those things to happen to me like happen in movies. And unfortunately, when you want those things, sometimes these things happen. So I get to Colombia. This is now year 2 of my travels. So at the time, I would have been 25 years old. So yeah, 25 years old or so. As you guys who have followed the podcast in my life know, I moved to South America right out of university and took a job as a tour leader. After a year doing that, I realized that I wanted to do travel writing and travel blogging. And I started to travel all the way around South America. I did basically a loop because I started in Quito, Ecuador, and I moved all the way up into Colombia. Basically, before I tell the story, of how I got kidnapped in Colombia, I think I need the backstory of why I was in Colombia. If you listen to the last podcast, you'll remember that I had kind of a crazy journey through Venezuela to get to Medellin, Colombia. I was on my way to Medellin, Colombia, basically for two reasons. The first is the reason that I basically stopped anywhere in my travels early days was that I was broke. Basically, in my travels, I would travel and travel and travel until I ran out of money, and then I would stay wherever I ended up, hopefully somewhere cool, until I had money again and could travel again. This was a theme through the first 6 or 7 years of my travels, because I just didn't have any money. So I was trying to stop in cool places and kind of refresh and build the bank account again, and then build enough of a net that I could go out and travel. So I headed to Medellin, Colombia, because I was running out of money and I needed to rebuild the funds. It just so happened that another travel blogger that I knew named Marcello, who had a website called The Wandering Trader or something like this. He was a day trader, a digital nomad day trader. He was living in Medellin and had rented a penthouse. And when I say penthouse, it wasn't the nicest apartment. It was a nice apartment. But I say penthouse because it was on top of a building. And it was 4 bedrooms, and each of these bedrooms was $400 a month rent. When I moved to Medellin, I didn't even have enough for that $400 a month rent. Marcello spotted me at least the first month. My plan was to stay there for 2 or 3 months, and I think I ended up staying there for 6 months off and on. In Medellin during this time, my career started to kick off. A lot of good things started to happen. I had something happen to my blog, which doesn't really matter anymore. And it was basically a ranking that Google awarded my website, which was called PageRank. It basically gave power to my website and its legitimacy. At the time, most blogs were getting a PageRank of 2 or 3 out of 10. Really great sites, I believe, were 10s. That means they're super high quality content with a lot going on. I was given a page rank of 5, and I don't know how this happened or why, but it gave my website a lot of attractiveness to advertisers. And so all of a sudden in Medellin, I started getting advertisers on my blog, which is still called brendansadventures.com. And this blog started to generate some money. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was like 1,500 euros a month, more or less. But my goal was always about 1,500 a month. I felt like that's what I could live on. Anything else I earned could go back to paying my student loans off. So I was pretty happy with this. While I was in Medellin, I was also trying to figure out what my next steps were. I had this buddy named Tim, who is an Australian guy. He did danger rigging, if you will, danger oil rigging. It was an engineer, and he would basically work 28 days on, 28 days off. And every 28 days that he would work, he would make a giant chunk of money, and then he would travel those other 28 days. Tim really wanted to invest the money he was making in travel somehow. He also loved traveling. We met each other traveling. And so we had an idea actually at the time to open a hostel in Medellin. Tim was a bit of a baller compared to me anyway. I was broke. Tim was not broke. Tim was coming into town with a fresh 10,000, 15,000 euros in his bank account. And so we would go to the bar and sit in the VIP section, and he would buy drinks for everybody, bottles of alcohol, and we partied like rock stars on Tim's dime, or at least mostly Tim's dime. So Tim was kind of an influence off and on in my time in Medellin, because when Tim showed up, the party happened. There was also a guy named David Lee, who's also a travel blogger. He had a website called Medellin Living. He was like a mainstay in Medellin. He was one of the OG bloggers in Medellin. He really put the city on the map for tourists. He did a lot of work. He was an awesome guy, still is an awesome guy. And it's just incredible things to bring like legitimacy to Medellin as a tourism destination. And yeah, it was awesome. So basically, this was kind of my squad. I had Marcello, I had Dave, and then Tim on occasion. And it kind of turned into like this goofy little dude family that we had in Medellin for this time period. And we would go out and party probably once a weekend, but we weren't excessive. But we were all single guys. We were all, dudes that wanted to have some fun. And yeah, we like to have some fun. So that's kind of where the story goes. So this is where it gets into how I got kidnapped in Colombia. And so I think the way I want to walk you through what happened next was I'm going to tell you exactly what happened the night I got kidnapped. And then I'm going to backtrack and explain what actually happened. And I think it should be clear that what happened, according to me, is mostly based on just blurred memories. So I can't say 100% for sure the things that happened on that night happened exactly the way they did, because I don't exactly remember most of it. I only remember bits and pieces of it, and also some of what I remember might be tainted. You'll understand a bit later. Okay, so Tim, Dave, Marcello, and myself go out to this nightclub that we went to all the time, almost every weekend in Medellin. It was called Platinum. Was it called Platinum? I believe it was called Platinum. And Platinum basically had two levels. It had what you would call the fun level and the boring level. The fun level's where the people are. The boring level's up in the VIP. To get into the VIP, you have to buy at least a bottle of alcohol. We liked the fun level better because it was more fun. But we also wanted a place that we could go to kind of like escape the craziness of the fun level. So we would always buy a bottle and go up and hang out in the VIP section and just chill. And then occasionally we would go downstairs to the fun level to engage in some fun, some dancing, some socializing, just have a good time. So we're upstairs, we have a bottle, we're drinking, we're having a great time. And I don't think it's even this late in the evening. And I decide I'm going to go downstairs to socialize and drink and dance. And so I head downstairs to the fun level. And I don't remember much after this or before this. All I remember is going down to the fun level, meeting a girl at the bar, and then dancing. I don't remember anything from this point to dancing with this girl to getting into a car. I remember getting in a car, just in pieces. I remember this. I remember the door opening, and I remember getting in on the right-hand side specifically, and I sit down in the chair. Then the left side door opens, and a guy gets in. And I remember thinking, wasn't I with a girl? And again, I'm kind of just like, I don't remember anything beyond this moment. Then I remember bits and pieces of driving and being in this car and realizing we're going up a hill. And if you've ever been to Medellin, Colombia, the city kind of sits in a bowl. You've got much of the main part of town down on the river level on the bottom. And then there's some other areas of town that are slightly up the hillside. And then way up on the top is kind of more of the shadier parts of town, if you will. The less wealthy parts of town are up high. So as we're driving up the hill, I remember thinking, why am I in a car driving up a hill? And I looked around, and there was a guy to my left, there was a guy in the driver's seat, and there was a guy in the passenger seat. And I kind of thought, like, who are these people? But I didn't think anything bad was happening. I was just like, why are we driving up the hill? And then they started asking me things like, do you have your credit card on you? And I was like really broke at this time, by the way. I was saying that I had made money. I didn't have any money in my bank account this weekend this happened. And they started going like, where's your credit card? And I remember pulling my credit card out of my pocket and showing them and being like, this is my credit card. And then the guy was like, can I have it? And I was like, sure. I just gave him my credit card. And then I said to him, like, there's no money on it though. Like, I'm broke. I've got no cash. And the guy was like, okay, what about like your debit card? Do you have a card that has cash on it? And I was like, yeah, I've got another card. And I took out my debit card. And he said, can I have it? And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. And I gave it to him and he said, what's the PIN number? And I just told him my PIN number. And I remember laughing and thinking it was funny because I had no money on the account. So I remember saying, yeah, but there's like $5 on it. There's no money on this card. And I was laughing. I thought this was so funny that I had all these cards and there was no money on them. They were all maxed out. I started giving them other credit cards and I basically gave them everything in my wallet and told them that there was no money. And I was laughing and thinking it was funny. And then all of a sudden, the guy beside me got really, really annoyed and upset and mad and started swearing and yelling and raising his voice. And I did speak Spanish fluently back then, just for the record. And I wasn't really understanding what he was saying because he was just speaking so loud and so fast. But I knew it was aggressive and that kind of set a switch for me and a trigger. And I was like, oh, something's wrong. And then it was almost like an instinct to get out of the car. It was like, Brendan, you got to get out of this car. So we pull up to this light. The light goes red and I wait and wait and wait. And then I decide to make a move. I open the side door and I just fly out of the door. And again, blurry, don't know exactly what happened. Next thing I know or remember is climbing a fence and getting up and over this fence. And the fence had barbed wire on the top, but I managed to get through the barbed wire, cutting myself, cutting my shirt, losing one of my shoes, and ending up on the other side of the ravine. I don't know if these guys chased me. I don't know if these guys just let me go. I don't remember any of that, but I do remember thinking, oh shit, I'm in trouble. I need to get away. So I get over this fence. And in Medellin, you have these neighborhoods, and there's also the ravines and rivers that cut through town, and they're usually fenced. So I get up and over this barbed wire fence, and I end up in this ravine, and I've got one shoe, I've got a ripped shirt, I've got ripped jeans, I'm covered in mud and blood, and I'm walking down the ravine trying to find a way out, but also scared that these guys are looking for me. And so I'm being very quiet and calm and trying to scamper through unseen until eventually I feel like I'm safe and I want to get out. So I get up to the edge of the ravine and I'm walking along a fence and I can't get out. There's nowhere to get out. The fence is too high and at the top of the fence there's barbed wire. It's basically just blocking me in. At a certain point I realize I've got to get out of this fence and I need to get home. So I eventually find a point in the fence that I feel like I can scramble through the barbed wire. I get up and over the top, get around the barbed wire, hook my pants, rip my pants, cut myself again, fall down to the ground really badly. And I'm out. And so then I walk down to the road and imagine this. I've now thrown away my other shoe because why walk in one shoe? I get to the road and I'm covered in blood, mud, a ripped shirt, ripped jeans. I've got no shoes on. I'm just absolutely filthy. And I decide I have to flag down a taxi. Back then, Brendan was stupid, but he was also a little bit smart. And I used to always stick a 20,000 peso note in that tiny little pocket on blue jeans. I used to hide it there, and that was my get me home money. Because if I was at the bar and I'd spent too much money and I ran out of money, I would always have that little get me home money to get me home. And I had this money still in my pocket. Get back to the road, flag down a taxi, and I get down into the taxi, and in Spanish I say to him, "Hey man, some shit went down. I'm sorry, I'm disgusting, I'm dirty, I'm bloody, I need to get home, please help me." And he looked at me and he said, "Bro, I was a taxi driver in the 80s in Medellin. I've seen everything. Where do you live?" It was like so cool and collected and just like, "You'll be fine, everything's fine, you're with me, I got you." And he drove me home. I remember I got home and went up to the penthouse of the apartment. I went through security. I really don't remember going through security, but security must have looked at me like shit. But I go upstairs, and I remember I didn't have my keys. I think Marcello only had the keys. I rang the doorbell, middle of the night. Marcello opened the door, and he looked at me, and I'm just covered in blood and dirt. And he just looked at me, and he went, "What?" And I went, "Dude, I got kidnapped." And he immediately, and I remember this is probably where me and Marcello stopped being really close friends, but I remember he looked at me and he said, "You got kidnapped? That's hilarious. I've got to tweet this." And I was just like, I don't remember like having any emotional feeling about what he said, but in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of messed up. But then, so next thing I do, I go into the shower and I shower with all my clothes on, and I still remember vividly looking down at the bottom of the shower and just seeing blood and dirt and mud covering the floor. And I think it was only really at that point that I realized how serious the night was. When I woke up in the morning, I would say that I didn't have any sense in how dangerous the thing that happened to me was. I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel worried. I didn't feel anything. The next weekend, it was like, "Hey, are we going to do anything this weekend?" And I was like, "Hey, do you think we should go to Platinum?" And the guys were like, "You got kidnapped from there last week. You want to go back?" It didn't affect me. And I think it was because I was drugged. Because I was drugged, it didn't ever feel like something that ever happened to me. It always just felt like a dream. It felt like something that I just made up in my brain. It felt like a dream. It felt like it didn't feel real. And I honestly just kind of shrugged it off, and it didn't bother me. It didn't bother me at all. Then a couple months later, my buddy sent me an article from an English language newspaper in Colombia that was about devil's breath. And it was a story about how there was an increase of kidnappings of foreigners in Colombia using a drug called the devil's breath. Now that you've known the story, I'm going to kind of tell you what we believe happened to me and what I think happened to me. So I'm in the dance floor, on the fun floor. I believe what happened to me is the girl that I was talking to at the bar offered to dance with me. I went to the dance floor and danced with her, and she used a drug called the devil's breath. Devil's breath is, and sorry about pronunciation on this stuff, it's scopolamine. Scopolamine is medically used to treat motion sickness. It can also help with people with nausea after surgery. It's an antimuscarinic drug that blocks the effects of acetylcholine within the nervous system. It was developed in the 1880s, and it was originally used as an anesthetic. And this drug is crazy, and it's pretty scary, to be honest. There's all sorts of stories about how it was used in crazy ways throughout its history. There's people that said that during the World War II, the Nazis actually used it as a truth serum, that when they were interrogating people, they would use devil's breath as a truth serum to get them to confess to things and to tell them things and to lead them to answers. In fact, as recently as 2009, I think this was Wikipedia told me this, as recently as 2009, the Czechoslovakian secret police were proven to have used it 3 times in interrogations against government dissidents. So this is something that's been used as a truth serum as recently as 2009. In hindsight, when this happened to me, it was 2009. I believe it was 2009. So the same time the Czech secret police are using this as a truth syrup, not a truth syrup, a truth serum, a person in Colombia is using it on me. In Colombia, the devil's breath they call burundanga, and the most common way that it's used is they crush it up into a powder and they blow it in people's faces and then they breathe it and it drugs them. Hence why they call it the devil's breath, I guess. You breathe it and it creates a dust and you breathe it in. It was confirmed that this is what happened to me. I went back to Platinum the next day or 2 days later because I wanted them to know that something had happened to me so that they could maybe keep an eye out to see if these people try to come back and just try to protect other people. And they said, hey, let's look through the security footage and you can quite clearly see me on the dance floor with this girl and her blow something into my face. Yeah, it was pretty obvious that that's what happened. And then about 30 minutes later, you see me walking out the door behind her. They didn't have cameras on facing the road. They only had cameras on the door, but you can see me walking out behind her. So I guess I was drugged with devil's breath. She convinced me to leave, and then I walked out and got in the car with Min. She probably literally walked me up to the car, opened the door for me, I got in, and then she went walking off somewhere else or got in a taxi or just left on her own, or maybe went back into the bar. I don't know. It wasn't until my buddy Dave sent me this article that I actually started to realize how serious what happened to me was and started to feel like scared. I think at the time I wasn't, aware of my own mortality. I just thought I was going to live forever and I was untouchable. I had all these crazy things that happened to me in my life already, and I'd done some wild things, and nothing bad had happened to me in my life. To that point in my life, the worst thing that happened to me is I kind of cracked a rib once at football. That's it. So I was kind of feeling like I was a little bit invincible, until I read this article. Before filming this podcast, I did a little bit more digging on burundanga, devil's breath. In Colombia, they call it burundanga. They've been using burundanga for a really long time in Colombia. In fact, back in 1995, the hospital data from Bogota says that 50% of the admissions to the emergency room was because of devil's breath. So it's rampantly used. Burundanga can render a victim unconscious for 24 hours. It can cause respiratory failure and even death. In Colombia, there's 50,000 cases annually of people being drugged with devil's breath. Drugs.com says it's the world's scariest drug, and it can render victims into zombie-like state. What I think happened to me is what they call in Colombia secuestro express. Secuestro express. I really can't pronounce that word. Express kidnapping, essentially. Why can't I say the word secuestro? There we go, secuestro. Secuestro express. I shouldn't be laughing about these things. It's my pronunciation. Express kidnapping. So these express kidnappings are something that's pretty rampant in Colombia. And as much as I love Colombia, and I totally advise that you should go, it is something you have to be cautious about. You can't take these things lightly. You can't just expect to be able to live your life as if you're in a small town in Canada when you go there. You do have to be aware of your surroundings. So these express kidnappings, basically their goal is, I think, what happened to me. I like to think that what happened to me wasn't a dangerous thing, but was a quick kidnapping. A quick kidnapping, basically their goal is to drug you into this zombie-like state where you give up a lot of information. You go to an ATM and you give them all the money in your bank account or up until you max out. You give them your credit card information so that they can also use it at an ATM. And they take all your information and then they drop you off. There's lots of stories about the quick kidnappings in Colombia. I've heard stories of people that had been quick kidnapped, wake up in the morning and then not even realize that it happened to them. I heard one story of somebody who was at a bar. Same thing has happened to me. Remembers bits and pieces of being in a car with somebody else, wakes up in their own bed, totally normal, and opens their bank account and they were almost totally cleaned out. And they looked back at some footage from the day, and literally these kidnappers took them to an ATM. They withdrew a bunch of money, took them to another ATM, withdrew a bunch of money, and then literally the kidnappers drove them home and dropped them off at their house. They woke up in the morning thinking nothing bad happened. I like to think that's what happened to me because I don't want to think about the fact that it could have been something worse. But worse things do happen. In 2023, in the first 10 months of 2023, there were 32 foreigners killed in Medellin alone. In 2023, for example, there was an American guy who was kidnapped, and he had called his brother back home and basically said, I need $2,000, please send money immediately. And his brother tried to get a hold of him again, couldn't get a hold of him, and his body was found a couple days later in like a woodland area. So bad things do happen to people that are kidnapped. A lot of these things happen from guys on dating apps. They'll go on these dating apps in a city like Medellin. They'll meet somebody. They'll get kidnapped and drugged. And yeah, bad things happen. In the case that I just mentioned, a woman and 2 men were convicted and sentenced for the murder. But yeah, 32 foreigners in Medellin killed in 2023, in the first 10 months of 2023. So obviously, when I read those numbers, I feel so lucky and fortunate that I got off the way I did, and I feel stupid. I feel like so silly that I allowed myself to be so comfortable in a situation that could potentially be dangerous. But I didn't know that it could be dangerous. I didn't know about this thing happening. I feel like at the time, very few foreigners were aware of this drug or the potential of this happening to them. In my case, the police never ever got back to me. I filed a police report. I talked to them. After that, I never heard from them again. It was literally just another case of probably what was many at the time. And like, how do I feel about it now? I think now I'm more scared of what happened than back then, but I'm like scared about what could have happened because current Brendan, my current self, I'm a very conscious person. I'm a very aware person. When I'm out in public, I feel like I know everybody around me and I've scoped everybody around me. And I think the 15 years I've spent traveling the world and going to some extremely dangerous places has taught me how to be aware of my surroundings and what to watch out for. And I think because of that, I feel safe now. But I look back and I'm like, how many times did I put myself into really bad positions and situations and not even realize it? And it's kind of scary looking back and thinking, what if the worst happened? Or what if something worse happened to me? And it makes me a little bit sad. But honestly, the thing that makes me the saddest about the story has nothing to do with me. The thing that makes me saddest about the story is that I don't think I've met kinder, more welcoming, more open people on the entire planet than those who I met in Colombia. When I was living in Colombia, I instantly made so many friends with so many people. The country has gone through so much over the past, basically since its independence, that it's really hard for me to talk about the negative side of Colombia because I feel like so many people talk about that negative side that I want to talk about the positive side. And the positive side of Colombia is it's one of the most beautiful countries on the planet geographically. Beautiful mountains, beautiful towns, countryside, jungle, coastline, beaches. It's just an absolute marvel of a country to visit. And I believe that every single person who loves travel should go and visit Colombia. You've got the Amazon basin, you've got the coast, the old city of Cartagena, Tayrona National Park, you've got Cali, Medellin, you've got the pueblos around Medellin, you've got Guatapé. It's such a beautiful country, and it's so badly tarnished by the bad behavior of some people that I really don't want to put too much emphasis on the bad behavior of the few, but it is something that does obviously need mentioning because it does happen. And with that, I want to, apologize to the people of Colombia for needing to tell this story, because I really don't want to tarnish your reputation. Your country is beautiful. The vast majority of you are beautiful, and you guys have been through so much, and I'm sorry for that, and I'm sorry that I had to add this story. To those watching or listening to the podcast, I'm going to be back again with podcasts. I'm going to try to post them once a week, but you know me, maybe it'll be more like once every 2 weeks. And actually, the next story I'm going to talk about is probably the second bad thing that happened to me in South America, which was when I got totally robbed in Ecuador, and it was all my fault. We'll talk to you guys then. Peace.